good to see you at last. So let's move to today's topic. My name is Honza and I will be talking about workers and queues. So actually, let's start with the game plan. First we will be talking about worker, then queue, and background job. It should be also part in the name of this presentation because it's at the same level as the workers and queues. Then we will be talking about scheduling, and at last we start live coding on our Velvet notebook. So what actually worker is? I started by Googling, and one of the first items on the search page was this quote from Oxford Dictionary: a person who does a specified type of work or who works in a specified way. So, you know, it wasn't good enough, so I searched for the images. That's worker, poor guy in India cleaning sewer. Not good enough for me, so I went to the great dev center on Heroku. And Heroku, speaking about workers, in the way it can be any process that is declared in your profile. You already know what profile really is. And it shouldn't be type of web. You can name it as a worker, you can use completely different name. Heroku doesn't care. The only name that's required for Heroku is web, so you specify your web process and then you can use whatever name you need for the worker. So you can see here the example of the profile we will be having at the end of this presentation. Really, what worker is, it's used for running background jobs. It's basically running your code base, but in a separate process, which means it uses its own resources, so you can scale it completely different than you scale your web process. You just need to have it run all the time, so you will be paying for this on Heroku, even if it's idling. But it's still $7 demo, and the benefits are really great. So that's about worker. I spoke about background job. What that is, it's basically code execution outside of your usual request response lifecycle. So every interaction that's not crucial for your end users should be done in background jobs, because like the rule of thumb from Heroku is if your request is taking more than 500 milliseconds to run, you should use background jobs. Like Heroku is really strict in their policy, so if I believe it's like 30 seconds or a minute, they will cut your request. So for example, if you try to resize image, you should definitely do it in background job. Or PDF generation, like invoices. If you generate invoices, it's not the really crucial part of interaction. When your user, for example, make order, you don't need to send invoice right away. You just send him message, your order is being processed, and in your background job you generate a PDF with invoice and send it later on the user's emails. So that's a perfect example for your workers, for background job running in the worker. Basically every long running task you should put in the background job. Like my first interaction with background jobs was when I did the application that requires a user to upload a profile picture. And you know, from your iPhone there's like a couple of megabytes, and you just need to display, I don't know, 200 pixels image in the top of the web page. So you need to resize it because the resources and the mobile internet is really poor somewhere. So I tried to do it in the part of the standard cycle, and I've been disconnected from Heroku every time. So I read about the workers, how to solve it, and yes, the background jobs was the only option. Like right now, for the image generation, you can use different approaches, but it was the first interaction for me, and after that, I'm using workers on every project because the benefits are great. So let's move to the queue. Michelle already spoke to with the information about use queue. So let's look at the queues. It's basically queue. If you imagine in the post office, you just pick your number and wait. So it's the same with the views, with the queues in terms of workers. You have your background job, you have your worker process, and you just need to communicate between each other. So for that purpose, we have messaging queues. Let's say the two most popular options right now is to use Redis-based queues and RabbitMQ-based queues. So let's start with the Redis-based. For Node.js, we have a great library called Val. It's based on the Redis. It uses standard Redis APIs in the background. It's just storing into set and retrieving the last edit at first. So it can schedule and repeat your jobs. Here you see the minimum example how to implement messaging queue in Val. It's just a part of the execution when it retrieves your job, and here it's just like console read. So you need to just specify the name of your queue because you can have multiple queues in your project and connection to Redis. Standard is port 6379. That's pretty easy. And also Google has many other options. They support priority and stuff like that, but usually you can just spawn another queue, use another worker. So let's get to the RabbitMQ example. In Node.js, again, we have Node package called mqplib. It's based, RabbitMQ supports the MQP protocol with this version 091. I think at this moment the newest version is 1.0, but RabbitMQ doesn't support it. What they say on the website of RabbitMQ is the most widely deployed open source message broker. What does it mean? I don't know. Just sending messages between your consumer and producer. That's the word. So here you see to implement consumer in mqplib, it's quite hard. It's the comparison to, well, you need to write a lot more code. This is from the project I was working on quite a while ago, so maybe the API changed at this moment, I don't know. But it's the same exactly as the Val example, but 22 lines compared to 10, I guess. Quite a lot. But RabbitMQ by design is more robust and scalable. So if your case is to send thousands of messages per second, you should definitely use RabbitMQ and not Redis. It supports multiple queue types from PubSub, routing, RPC, which means like queuing requests for servers and routing replies back to the clients. But I won't be going into much details because I actually don't know everything. I just used, I guess, 2 types in my career, and most of it was just like sending and receiving and no routing at all. There's also many more options. For example, B is another library based on the Redis. There is quite popular Firebase queue, which is plugin to Firebase. It's not officially supported by Google, but I've seen many projects using it, working pretty well. And of course, there's AWS with its SQS, but if you want to achieve something like the mqplib or Boom, you need to put together more pieces than just the SQS, which is simple queuing system, I guess, but it doesn't cover persistence of your messages, so every time you scale, you lost everything. So you need to put something like keyword storage to store your messages so it can persist. And I believe you need to put together with SNS, so you really want to build something that will last decades, you should go with AWS, but I've tried to and I failed, so I'll be talking about it much more. I don't know, super hard to implement all the services together. So let's see what we have now. Scheduling. It's another perfect example for workers. You can imagine in your application you need to do periodical jobs, like, I don't know, clean up your database, put it into different type of storage, repeat, I don't know, every day at midnight. So you can schedule your job to run at the exact time you want. And for this, we have a couple of solutions. It's not schedule, the library, super easy. It supports cron. Cron is, as you probably know, the software utility for scheduling job in Unix-like ecosystem. If you, for the Unix system PHP, probably use crons. If you are like me, who don't remember how to properly write a cron, you can use this link, crontab.guru. It's very nice. You can play with it. But Node also support JavaScript dates and object. It's super easy for scheduling whatever you want. I used it on my project before and it worked very well. And also, the goal we have been talking about supports cron as well. So when you are adding message into queue, you can specify this repeat option, and you can set up your cron again. This one is putting 42 into queue every 42 seconds. Maybe good for something, not sure. It's from their documentation. So now, let's go to the business. And let's start our build tech book. So, because of your hard work, the book is getting quite popular. And, I heard rumors about investments and stuff like that. I read articles on Hacker News and Product Hunt. So yeah, it's quite popular and people are using it. But because of people are using it, it's quite popular, it attracts trolls as well. So you need to fix that. Let's say you want to have your doc profile and you are going through the another profiles and you see stuff like that, which is not really on the book. Guys, seriously, you need to get rid of this. So let's use image recognition for the photos and mark the profiles as verified. Then we can identify the picture as a dog. So because doing this image recognition is not really doable in this 1 hour lecture, I already prepared the service for that. It's on top of the master as of now. This is, this is actually the div for this dog photo verification service. If you are looking at the master right now, you will see this. So first thing that changed is this env.example file, because for the image recognition, we will use AWS recognition, and you need to fill these environment variables, the access key, the secret key, region. Images are stored in S3 bucket, so you need to fill the name of the S3 bucket as well. There are some packages, config with AWS. The image recognition returns labels, what it sees on your photo you are recognizing. And for each label, it returns the confidence by what it thinks is really the label. So we are setting the minimum confidence for the dog label, which will be 90%. I've also added validation. So the dog's table now has the flag auto verified, which will be set after the verification. Now, yes, now the dog's operation. What's new? Yeah, in the create dog function, I've also already added the recognition. You can see here the recognition is the recognized function call, and also updated the function which we'll be using later on. Yeah, there is another new function in the repository just to update fields. And now here's the beauty, the image recognition service. I would say like 38 lines for image recognition. That's quite good. God bless AWS. You can look at this function later on. It's quite hard, and also fixed tests, so they are running. So now you can create new dog. Let's check if I'm on the right branch. Okay, master, that's not right. So now, not right. Yes. So let's log in. Now we will see the creation of the takes quite a long time because of the image recognition. It's about 1 second. Not that bad, but still for the user interaction, 1 second, then you have to add the latency of the internet connection and the rendering of the front end. It can be quite a long latency. So let's try to fix it using background jobs. Let's get into the code. So my notes here. So first of all, let's install packages. For example, we are using the bulb package, the easy one. NPM magic is there. Also, we will need to have Redis. As you already know, the best way of putting Redis is to use Docker Compose. Let's put it there. Redis. Redis. Oh yeah, I'm really good at typing. Bear with me. Export ports. It's 6379. 6379. Okay, now let's run our infra. Good. Okay, let's put our Redis URL into the config file so we can access it later. Section jobs, Redis URL. pieces and you fall back to where it is. 3, 7, 9. Okay. Good. We will need to somehow start the worker as well. So for that, there is a great package in Nodejs called Foreman. So let's install it. Foreman.
You only want that as a development dependency?
Yes, because on the production environment, I have it's
okay, it'll run the work, okay.
You're running from the pros file.
Okay.
But if you want to run pros file on development, you need this package.
Okay.
So,
Approach file.
Let's edit our packages as well. Yes. So, we need to start node 1. Need to watch STRV, JavaScript extension, and now we will execute script. Go. This is the link to Foreman. It's not Foreman enough. Enough start. Let's see if it works.
What does which do?
Sorry?
What does which do?
It just throws your changes. Or it throws the server after changing something. Run that. Yes. Yeah. As you can see, it runs your first file that is meant for Heroku, which also has the I think it's called release section, and it's trying to run your migration. It's failing. So let's create copy, call it cross-file dev, and run it instead for development. And it's J cross-file dev, and also edit the cross-file dev and remove the release key. Check that. Okay, now we're up and running. You can also add female property to have nice blocks. Here we go. So let's create empty worker. It's just won't be doing anything at this moment. So let's put it into CRC directory, JavaScript file. Strict. Log in here. Just to verify it's working. Yes. just copy from the app.js. Start. Worker. Now it's file. Get our newly created worker. Okay, our worker started and exited successfully. It's good to know. So, to keep it actually alive, you'll create a new job that will be connecting to your Redis, and the connection will keep your worker alive. So, let's create a directory. Let's call it test. Jar already 0 from config. The drag is perfect. It's quite an achievement, I guess. Test. This. Config. Jobs. Okay. We implement the execute function. Which will actually do nothing at this moment, just to log it started. Job started. Says job. Over the job. Starts. Execute. Now we can run the execute function in our worker start. So let's jump. Jobs test. Here. Job. Execute. And it should do the trick. So as you can see, it started the job and it didn't kill it. That's good progress. Okay. I believe that's it. Now we can create some business logic in our job. we put our image verification into separate job. Verification. This here. Started as well. Okay. Okay, another job started. Verification job started is there. So we actually put something into queue. We need to implement another function. What is it? Maybe add. It will receive just a URL to our image. We'll just say subject. Export it. Okay, so in our next operation, we will require the verification job. Verification. Let's just edit it here. Verification job. And it's in photo. Okay, which we will right. It's good. So let's create another block. Access token here. Okay, we are still doing the recognition as part of the creation, but now we can see it also adds something to the job, and here we can see in the data URL the URL to the image. So now we see it's passing through the release queue, which is good. So let's move to another step. Let's remove the verification that is slowing us down here from the operation. Yes. Yes. Oh. It's quite fast. 170 milliseconds. How's the weather? Yes.
So, question, is the verification job,
It's just receiving the URL. It's not doing anything right now.
not at the moment, okay, okay.
So we will get there. We're just passing the URL to the
Okay.
job, so we can now work with it. Let's get to the business. So now, here we're getting the URLs. Let's job data. Also require the verification service, the recognition service. Require. So this is recognition. Oh yeah. operation. See here. For now, we will just work the result. So, verified, right, recognition, is recognized, and you're just looking here. Verified. Okay, we can use our interiors photo. We can't. Oh yeah, of course. Okay, false. And yeah, we can see it runs the verification returns false because there was no doc label with at least 90% confidence. But at this moment, we are not saving into the database. Everything we create now. Yeah, it's false by default, so let's create another doc. Yeah, still false even if it's doc. So let's do the finish step. To just save to verification result in the database. For that, we will need also the ID for the newly created hopefully doc. So let's go to operation. Yes. This doc. Right. Here we go. Save doc. Here. Doc. ID. It's here. First argument should be IDs. Here as well. Here. So now we passed our ID to the one where we can actually use it. Okay, so let's require our update doc operation. Object with the change which is photo verified flag. Okay, it's here, here. Okay, just verify the looking in rock. So let's create first, look first. Oh, get first. Okay, here we have our doc with an entity and photo verified is false, which is right, but it was false by default. Let's check with the buffer here. It's false right after creation. but now we have photo verified as a true and can verify it in the list of dogs. So here it is, it's true. I think that covers our case. And last step to do is just to add our worker to the hair Cooper's file. And that's it. We show about 1 second from our request. Everything is working as expected. Our clients are happy. We have 100 dogs in our dog book. That's good. So,
And what is the model behind the image recognition like?
basically, AWS offers you trained neural network as a service, which exposes a couple of APIs, and one of it is detect labels. So it can detect basically labels from the photo you are posting. The requirements for the photo, the best way how to do it is to put it into S3 bucket, or you can send basically base 64 type of data. It's super nice. Like you can see in just like a couple of lines you can detect this.
And like, what's the limitation, or is it paid service, or like?
I think it is actually paid, but as it is with AWS, when you register your account, you have 1 year for free, so you can play with it if you want.
Azure has a free service for image recognition as well.
Yeah, and I think
Azure, Microsoft.
Google Vision is there as well.
Yeah.
So this free micrometers. I used AWS recognition because I used it in my previous project, so I have experience with it.
And so their models are good, like the good accuracy for image recognition, or?
It's pretty good. It's not the level of Apple with their Face ID, but still it's pretty accurate. So you can, I think you can play with it on their website. Choose. Oh yeah, I think it's just a couple of regions there on the website. You can play with it. It's basically what it's doing. Just returns your from this photo. You can see cars, horizon, skateboard.
So you upload your photo to see the results, right?
Yes. They have different APIs for face comparison. I think they have do celebrity recognition, so you can check if your face as some celebrity. Jeff Bezos, or not sure the use case, but yeah, they're right. So I believe this is it. So what we are today with our workers. Now we know it's not the poor man India guy in the sewer cleaning. It's just running your application running in different process. Like to use background jobs, how to communicate between your application and background job, and also how to schedule jobs to run recurrently. I believe that's it. If you have any question, feel free to ask me, or if you don't have, it's time for the record.
I have a question.
Right?
I really want to go first one though, but I still have a question. Would this be useful as like a general architecture for like the whole backend to sort of keep things asynchronous, decoupled? I mean, at least performance-wise, like to keep the whole thing in different orbits, sort of separated.
Basically, it depends on your use case because you are losing the immediate reaction to your action. So if you can afford it, your client doesn't require to know the answer right after. It's a good way. But for example, I was speaking about the image resizing and stuff. For that, nowadays it's preferable better to use.
Maybe even easier tasks. Like, you you're not getting any immediate response from the main thread as well, and it like stops everything other as well that's running in it. So like performance-wise, it would sort of seem like a good idea. Well, or at least interesting. Wouldn't say good, that's why I'm asking.
If you have like action that takes a lot of resources, you don't want to other users to experience like your CPU is running at 100% and the rest of the site will be sloppy or the application will be sloppy. That's the real case to use background jobs. I don't know if I answered your question.
It's great.
I'm satisfied.
Yeah, scrapers are a good case as well.
Yeah.
Okay, basically I think it's in the Heroku Data Center, the use cases they recommend to use background jobs. It's like fetching to party APIs, uploading stuff to S3, and also scrapers.
Yeah. And like every worker runs on separate thread on CPU, or how does it work?
In Heroku it runs on separate dyno, so you will pay for it, but you can scale it differently.
And
So
on your own server, like normal Linux server, like how does it work?
yeah, that's a really good question.
Single thread. And
I actually never run it on separate server outside of Heroku. So I believe the idea behind background jobs comes from Heroku because they're really strict policy.
Yeah, I've got a worker running on Elastic Beanstalk and PHP.
Yeah, it's,
Yeah.
you can run it on a separate machine.
But it's in the same. It's on the same, let's say, instance that my main, web server is running. But yeah, basically, what we have is every time we have a movie website, so every time someone searches for something that we see if it's in our database, and if it's not, it goes off to IMDb, steals it, queues the entire cast, goes off, steals all their information and everything from IMDb. But yeah, it just queues like 400 jobs every time someone searches.
One point is you don't want to crash your application when there is something wrong in your worker, so it's on the same machine, it can happen. So.
But I ran it incorrectly and I woke up one morning and my queue database was 6 gigabytes just in queue records. I was like,
Yeah.
I'm not doing that right.
That happened to me as well because in your Rabbit MQ you have the retry policy and I programmed it incorrectly. So in Heroku the plugin, the add-on for Rabbit MQ for the free, it has some capacity, like I don't know, mail messages or something. And yeah, it was gone after one night. And I was about to send like 3 messages per day. I just ping it there and there. So any more questions? If not,
Is there like any advice when to use lambdas on AWS, basically go serverless, or when to use workers on Heroku?
that's a good question. It depends if you can, like, I would say you need to compare costs, and the workers on Heroku, they can use the code base you are using for your application. So if you go with Lambda, you need to build a completely different code base, and if you want to share code, you need to think about it, so create private packages in Node or something like that. So if you have completely separate service, like for example, resizing image, it doesn't require your code base, so you can use Lambda and just like ping the results using Cube back to your application and save it. Welcome. Any more?
Sound good?
So I guess we are done. It's time for the rest.
Talk today about some security basics in Node.js applications, or maybe in backend applications in general. Yeah, spoiler alert, there's no way we can do this comprehensively. So I just picked some major issues that are common, and we'll go through that. I'll be happy if you'll communicate with me and add your experiences to the whole talk. Otherwise, it will be just me rambling for an hour, and you'll be sleeping in 10 minutes. So let's do this. First, I would like to go through some principles that apply. Considering that, there's this Open Web Application Security project. You probably have heard of it. It's this open initiative to map common vulnerabilities in web applications and to educate developers in how to address them and how to avoid making them themselves. This is quite a comprehensible project. If you want to really know this stuff, then you should totally check it out. And unfortunately, it's out of the scope of what we can do now. But we'll definitely mention some things from the project. So the first thing I picked up, it's a really general idea that might be too abstract now, but we'll get to the implementation parts later. Basically, if a user wants to access some resource, I don't know, it could be like the list of dogs or a profile of a dog or something similar, then his privileges to view that thing should always be checked. Way we can do it could be, for example, doing it somehow systematically. For example, by adding one more step here after into sorry, we do have it in controllers. Then controllers, as we discussed earlier, should validate input and then call an operation and afterwards return a result. Then the best place to validate users' permissions to view a resource would be inside that operation. So at the beginning of the operation, we would typically check if a user can, in this case, get the dog's profile or not. Yeah. Then the second thing is, even if the user has access to a resource, we should tell him the least amount of data possible. So basically what that would mean is that after we get some data from the database, we don't want to return all of it to the user, but want to restrict it to certain properties, for example. That would be it. And the way we do this, as usually is with security, we would whitelist the data that should be returned. Basically picking out only the properties we want to return and reparsing the output from the database to the output that should be returned to the user. Yeah, that's something really general, but it's a big part of what needs to be done in every application. And to get this done right, we do need to know where to incorporate these phases into our architecture. Well, and now maybe to more concrete stuff, like SQL injection. Do you know what SQL injection is? Well, basically, is there someone who doesn't? Don't be afraid. We can explain. But I wouldn't want to just waste your time if you all know. Okay, so I assume everybody does. That there's a nice illustration which should explain it well. Basically, how we protect against SQL injection would be everything that goes into our application, every data that goes in needs to be validated, so that that's first part of it, so that we can rely on the input we get, and there, for example, are no special characters as in the joke. The second part to this would be using some kind of ORM, as you used objection to lectures before. That's useful mainly because it has well written, even though all software is buggy, so even though there are some vulnerabilities and they are discovered, there are less than in the code you would write, and so we use ORMs to escape our data when asking the database. And yeah, the last thing would be one that backend developers that forget about, even if you write the wrong query, that we wouldn't be able to put together through the ORM. Then still we need to sanitize the input data, which would translate to well, basically ORMs do have support for raw queries, and in those you can define where your parameters should be placed, and place them there through the ORM so that they get properly escaped. Well, another thing would be cross-site scripting. So suppose you are making an application where the user's input would be later displayed to other users. In such case, it is always good practice to only accept text, not anything formatted like HTML, because if we do accept formatted text in such way, we get vulnerable. Well, we expose ourselves to someone injecting their, for example, JavaScript within the data. The data would then be stored in our database. If you don't sanitize it, then we have this data, possibly malicious data, stored in our database. And once another user views the data, if we display it as HTML, then the malicious scripts can be executed, and basically our users can get exploited by each other. And so the way we prevent this, we only accept plain text, only store plain text, and on the client, on the front end, we only display plain text, so that any script tags would be escaped in case someone tries to input some malicious code. Yeah, that's the very basic, but it's good to keep it in mind. Okay, the next topic could be in the dogbook, we tried creating simple authentication tokens which were valid for an hour, and after that they expired, and the user was no longer able to log with them into the application. It is common that we want such feature that the user stays logged in endlessly. How this would be implemented is using a refresh token which is only used to fetch a new access token from the server. So that basically the client application needs to re-authenticate each hour or so to obtain an access token, but it doesn't do so through asking the user for credentials, but it does so through a refresh token, which is only good for that. And this allows us to control the user session and log him out if we need to. Issuing endless access tokens would mean that the user, once having an access token, we cannot effectively log him out. Yeah, and yeah.
Where do you get this refresh token? You send him together with authentication token, so he receives like 2 tokens at the
Yes.
same time?
Once he logs in, he would receive both,
Yeah.
and the client application would only use the refresh token to receive another access token.
But the refresh token is still the same and without expiration, or?
Well, there are multiple ways to handle that. One would be to have it without expiration. That's actually a common implementation that is done. But this also ensures having this process in place and ensures that you have control over the user logging in or not. You can invalidate the refresh token. Well, you can invalidate also the access token, but yeah, it's not this way.
And if we get the only refresh token, can we get the access token? Like someone somehow steal it?
Yeah. Well, I'm sorry. I'm not sure. Do you know?
What's the question?
If you get the refresh token, which can be the same for the long time, if you can receive like the new access token from the web server, if you only get the refresh token and not having access token,
You usually use refresh token to get access token. So if you somehow
yeah,
manage to get the refresh token, you can receive the refresh token. But the connection should happen over HTTPS, which is secure, so there's no place to leak it. And when you somehow lost your phone or something, you can log on another device, like do the logout, which will erase the refresh token from the database, and there's no way how the attacker can receive the access token. That's the general idea behind refresh tokens.
Sorry, that's one thing I've been struggling to find is a really clear document on like token flow. Like when to store this in the database, when to delete this, when to, like just a simple like
I believe
step by step.
out zeros for it.
Do they? Okay. Because I was trying to read the standard and standards are never clear to read.
I believe we also have some internal research on this.
Okay.
Maybe.
Yeah. Because it's not difficult. There's just some edge cases on like logging out from another device and this, the refresh token.
Yeah, we also found out that there's not really a standard. It's just a set of recommendations.
Okay.
And everyone does it a little different.
Okay. Yeah, I think that maybe that's why there's not a lot of clear articles because it's kind of. Yeah. Anyways.
Okay, we can get back to that in the group later.
Okay. Cool.
Another thing would be logging. It's something that you actually stopped me about when we did the architecture lecture. Passwords, access tokens, anything like that should never appear in the logs. yeah. Why? Because, well, it's usually easier to get to the logs than to get into the application itself. And also the logs tend to be resent between developers to figure out issues, and then it becomes an issue quickly. So that's mainly why. A way this would be done is one way to do this is kind of systematical in a way that we would override our logging function in a way that it filters out passwords, access tokens, and stuff. That would be our basically fail-safe for a case that someone forgets and even gets through a code review without noticing that. But
how would I recognize these though? How would I recognize a password?
Well, usually what would happen in the application, we would want to log all of the input into a operation, and there it would be passed as an object with a password field. So we can just filter that out from the object when logging it. But yeah, it's not something that we could rely on completely. It's more of a fail-safe.
Yeah.
And otherwise, when logging, if we look at our log infos, it would be we would do something like this, basically picking out the pieces we want to log, or yeah, that would be probably the best way to do it, to pick what should be logged. Always whitelist and not blacklist. Okay, another thing is storing data. Often we do have to somehow store passwords, social security numbers, credit card information, and stuff like that. Then always, if it comes to passwords, always salt them and hash them. Never store the actual password, just in hash. You can then easily check if the users if the passwords match by doing the same process with the proposed password and comparing the hashes. But you cannot easily get the passwords back. So even if your database leaks somewhere, then the passwords don't. When it comes to
like algorithm or would you use
okay, what we used here, for example, which would be usable for production, was sorry, let me check.
because I know like MD5 is not good.
Yeah, no, that's not. We use something like this. We use bcrypt to hash it with.
Didn't in the config you define the method,
Yes,
the algorithm?
we did that in the config, and
H256 or something.
let me check. It was in the config default. We used HS256. Also, these change as the time goes by, as our computation power increases.
Because there was a case a few years ago, like the mall lost their database and it was able to get like 700,000 passwords from it because it was only MD5 and it took only hours to
correct that now. Yeah. So
So there's nothing.
basically, always use a little stronger encryption than you would find enough. So that would be to hashing or other things you might not be able to hash because of your workflow. Then at least encrypt that and encrypt that with a strong password. The password should then live in a configuration just on the server where it's running and nowhere else. And as few people as possible should have access to that. Woohoo! This one's fun. As JavaScript developers, the main argument to use JavaScript on both front end and back end would be code sharing between those two platforms, and we have to be careful with that. First, business logic that's confidential should not be shared in the front end bundle, as anyone can see it. The same with the encryption and decryption routines. Even if that just means telling everyone what kind of encryption and in which way you use that, it's still a lot of information to give out. Just don't do that. And there's also one fun part. If you have backend and front end running on the same server, be careful with what environment variables get exposed through the process and through the front-end bundling process. Because we've run into some funny issues when this was done on one server, and we had a common config for front-end and back-end, which itself probably isn't that bad idea, but we missed that subsetting in the webpack bundled all the environment variables in the front-end bundle, which wasn't cool. Okay, let's do something more. Input validation. We've stressed this a lot, but you can never stress that enough. All incoming data into the application should be validated against what you expect it to be. We've done that with JSON schemas, and you all should be familiar with that by now. The rule is to be as strict as possible about the data that gets in. It also helps prevent that SQL injection issues and stuff. And don't forget to set limits on how big the data can be. This isn't strictly a security issue, but if you don't do that, then the user can easily send you megabytes or gigabytes of data and just crash your server like that. And that's just a stupid mistake to do. Also, that's one thing we have kind of wrong in our dogbook application. If there are requests on the backend that can fetch lists of data, like list of all dogs, then you should limit the maximum number of results on backend. Even if you let frontend to specify the number of results, you should limit that to something reasonable, so that the data that actually gets pulled from the database and returned to the client doesn't crash your server. Ooh. Yeah. And then the keys and the password stuff, never commit them to GitHub. You all probably know that already, but yeah, just one has to be careful. And generally store them in environmented variables so that they can then only live where they should. Never send them to other people. If you need to share them in a way, then splitting them over multiple channels would be good, or maybe sharing them in person would be even better. If you have to use some third-party service to share them, split the password over multiple services, multiple channels. Yeah, and also reduce the amount of people who have access to production environment keys and passwords. It's not just about having tightened security, it's also in a way protecting the people that would have the access from being protect them from being the suspects if something happens. So if you have a problem or trouble explaining that to your teammates that they shouldn't get that access, it's not that you wouldn't trust them. It's more about you're protecting them from errors. Then Node applications typically communicate with a lot of services, database, third-party APIs. For all of them, always enforce SSL communication and always enforce privileged access using some kind of API key or passwords or better. And for database in particular, always set up backups.
And for workers, it's safe to communicate unencrypted?
Well, it depends on where they run. If they run on the same machine, then it's probably okay. If they do not, then they should communicate securely.
On the same machine, so there are no known approaches that could reach somehow this RAM, or I don't know how it works exactly.
Well, if you have someone in that position that is able to do that, then a Node application wouldn't probably be something that would stop that person. So yeah, it all has to be in proportion to the risks. So if someone is able to do something far more reaching, then we're screwed. Yeah, that's what we talked about.
Access to too many people, like we did this line before.
Yes. Yes. And then in APIs, when you use them, you quite often get a chance to create your own API key to access them. In that case, please keep those long. Like 32 characters is minimum we use, but basically the longer the better. Just keep it like that. And also, when sharing them, share them over multiple channels. Those were some basic principles that apply. How much time do we have?
10
10 minutes. Okay, we can do that. We can also use some tools to improve our security in Node.js apps. The first one would be Helmet. It's a neat little package that adds middleware to our application that sets HTTP headers correctly, so we get protected from some cross-site scripting vulnerabilities and similar. One would use it very easily, so we should. And basically it comes down to adding 2 lines to your app JS. It would mean installing the Koa Helmet package, which we would do just like this, npm install Koa Helmet. Once that is installed, we can import it, and then just after creating our core application, we would use it. And what this does, it adds a lot more headers to basically these, to our response, which sorry, I cannot make that bigger, which adjusts the browser behavior so it is more straight in when using our API. So that's one thing. If you want to know all the things it does, it's nicely covered on their npm site. And yeah, so that's Helmet. The second tool would be, and you probably noticed it already, when you do npm installs, it tells you that you can use npm audit and that there are some vulnerabilities in your libraries. So let's try to demonstrate that. Can you see it well? If we do npm audit, it would prepare this kind of a report for us, telling us that there's a low vulnerability which in the super agent library, and that we have it. Yeah, and that's all it tells us. What this does, it checks your library tree, basically what libraries you are using and the libraries those libraries are using, and so forth. And it does this check against an npm's database of vulnerable packages, and if it finds a match, then it tells you. You can then try to fix that, which we would do by by npm audit fix. And if there's a solution that we can apply, it will apply that. If there isn't, it will tell us that we just have to wait for someone to make the fix. And yeah, that's basically what it tells us. There's one vulnerability, it requires manual review, and the library cannot be updated to a newer version that possibly doesn't have this problem. So that's what npm audit would tell us. It's a good overview, especially if you come to an older project. Then it can be useful. on something up to date, it wouldn't probably do much. But
So does it tell you where is this
yeah, it tells us it's in the super agent package in the path. Yeah, in this path. So these libraries use that super agent.
Cool.
Yeah.
Have you ever chosen not to use an NPM library because of this?
Well, these vulnerabilities, they are not like static. They pop up every now and then, and yeah. If I would to choose a new package and it had several options, this would probably be useful to know.
Okay.
But otherwise, it's mainly to stay on top of your game and know where your issues are. So this is NPM audit. It's good for like educating developers, as it's integrated in NPM and tells you right away. But we have something better, which is called SNIC. It's a third-party service that does this, but on steroids. Yeah, it does the same thing basically, but it has much larger database of vulnerabilities. They have their own teams that try to find these, and what more, they do provide patches for some libraries, so that even if the owner of the library doesn't fix the issue, you can install a patch and be safe. What's nice about this is that it's just another package. You can install it by npm install SafeDev, because we only use this as a development tool, SNIC, and once we get that installed, we can easily integrate it into our workflow in a way that these vulnerabilities get always checked right after you run your tests, for example, so that you are always aware of what these are and can address them. Yeah, so what we can do now would be to adjust our package JSON so that we add something like this, which would be a command to run the SNIC test. Let me show you how that would look like. Woohoo. And if you run it, then it authenticates us against SNIC, so that it's run under our account, and then it proceeds with the checks, and apart from NPM, it did found 2 more vulnerabilities, and what's nice about that, you can set it up in a way that it checks this automatically on the background, like every day or so, and it can also create pull requests on your repository with fixes to library problems. So that's very nice. You can then just review the pull request and you're patched. Everything the users are, everything that goes on.
Isn't that something that actually happened with the exact package you mentioned?
Right?
Yeah. Something like that. Yeah, I remember it was something with lock coloring, and it like broke everyone's JavaScript.
Yeah, and this is a systematical issue. It's not something that can be addressed unless we get, well, not closed source, but closely reviewed code by some third party, and then that third party, like NPM, would be the one that could exploit that. And so,
I mean, it's debatable though, because, you know, if you're writing all your own stuff, like, who's going to be better at vetting the security of code? Like, you
Yeah,
or the 2 million people,
Yeah, like-
5.5 million people that download Express
Well,
Server a day?
I'm definitely
Or
not
a week.
saying it's not worth it.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm just in a theoretical way. It's sort of
Mhm.
like I do believe that anybody of those guys who are interested in it are way better in security than me. So I'm quite handing them the responsibilities. I'm okay with it.
yeah, it's good to be aware of that the system has its yeah has its pros and cons in a way that we allow everyone to share their code, but yeah, not everyone has to have the best interests. Yeah, so
What would happen if somebody, like you said, made this color logger and then make probably updated version which injects some malicious code? Like, would NPM get it down? Or
That's
like,
what happened. It's not like a possibility. It was very bad. It was very bad. There were like major projects were like halting and crashing and stuff because everyone downloaded their updates and got the malicious code in. Yeah.
And how long it took before they get it down? Like, or somebody noticed? Like,
I don't remember. I thought it well. I thought well, it was definitely like project dependent, but I think it was discovered pretty quickly on NPM. I think it was like a matter of hours, but still.
yeah, still if you get it in thousands or
Depends on how core to your functionality it is, you know.
yeah. Also, there's one thing. If you want to crash someone's project, then get your library used by as many people as possible, possibly through dependencies, and then just delete the code. and
Montelix.
and that's also something that happened. So yeah, there are some precautions to that done by NPM, but for a short time you can do that.
But I think it's another reason why, like, in your package.jsons, like, get rid of the little caret next to the version and always be very specific about the version you have in your package.json. You know, you don't want to be automatically bumping versions, you know, without review.
Yeah, that's true. You don't even have to have that exactly, but we have package log,
Yeah, okay. Yeah.
which does that for you.
But you can never know if some version isn't dependent on some other version which is not using the specific version. You can use the last of like
Yeah, that's the next thing.
So you can,
Yeah, it's fun, but it's a JavaScript environment, and it has all its pros and cons with it. And that, as we're out of time, would be all of it from me. If you have any further questions, I'd be happy to help, or we can just discuss them at scroll bar maybe.
I had a question.
Okay, so if you're happy,